everyone. I'm Father Alexander Har.
And I'm the Reverend David Marshall. Nice to see you, Alex.
Nice to see you too. And this is A Bridge Between, where we bridge our knowledge of the scriptures. We bridge the physical distance between us by doing this virtually. And what else are we bridging today?
We are normally we bridge the gospel, so we focus on Jesus. We are going to be talking about Jesus, of course, but we did something about the letter that St. Paul wrote to the church in Rome called Romans. We did that, and the folks that I know that watch us really enjoyed it. So we're going to try some more of that, of
I
the
like
letter
that.
of Romans. Right.
I like that because I like to talk about the letter to the Romans.
Good. I usually avoid it. So this is we'll build a bridge between the priest who likes to avoid talking about it and the one who likes to talk about it. So
All right.
and only one of us will win today. So let's see. I hope it's your opinion that wins. I hope that it's a good
Okay.
opinion.
Well, we'll see.
All right, good. So we have two paragraphs. We're going to focus on the second paragraph today, but what I'll be
Mhm.
reading from is Romans chapter 13. The full text is 18 through 14. 18, that doesn't make any sense. 13, 8 through 14.
Okay.
So I'm going to summarize the first part and then we'll jump into the second part. The first paragraph, Paul is telling us, you know, the commandments not to commit adultery, do not murder, don't steal, don't want what your neighbor has. All of that summed up with love your neighbor as yourself. And Paul writes that love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling the law. And I like that. I mean, there's not much for us to talk about. The only thing I'd like to highlight for those that maybe are listening to us for the first time is that love, when mentioned in the Bible, it
Hmm.
is not the type of love that you think of on Valentine's Day, where you've got little hearts and you send out Valentines. Love is not a feeling; it's an action verb. It's something that we do to help. And so, as you can notice, Alex and I have been through a hurricane. Actually, you probably can't notice that we've been through a hurricane because we are dry and we have electricity and everything. Our roof is intact, thanks be to God. Um, but there are some neighbors that had damage. And when love does no wrong to a neighbor, the love that the Bible is talking about is where you go help your neighbor clean up from the hurricane. If the fences fall down, you help them put the fence back up. You know, you do things to help your neighbor. And what Paul is saying is that that type of love is fulfilling the law.
And I would add to that because I've heard some great stories from some of my parishioners who live in different parts and they have family in different parts of Florida and throughout the Southeast who've been affected by the storm that talk about neighbors that they don't even really know very well who were going around helping people, helping get water out of their house, helping them have food because the refrigerator was most assuredly not working. And this is where I try to remind people Jesus commands us to love for a reason. It sounds like he's asking, he's
Yeah,
telling.
he's telling.
He's telling because on our own, we may not do it.
Yeah,
On our own time, on our own schedule, we may not do it. But when we realize that we've been commanded to do it, that it's from a deep sense of gratitude and obligation, but from a deep sense of gratitude for what we've received from God, that's where love truly begins, truly, truly begins to flow out into the world.
yeah. There's a restaurant that I pass by every day, which is on next to the Cortez Bridge. It's called the Tide Tables, and they are not a sponsor of the show. Um, but
Not yet.
they had, not yet. They had at least 3 feet of water, and they have been um, redoing all of the sand in our area. And I think half the sand that they redid ended up inside of their restaurant. And so the next day, the owner of the Tide Tables, she had a wide angle photo of like 19 people who had showed up to help them get the sand out and get their restaurant open. And she said, 12 of these people I know. The others just were walking by and pitched in a hand to help. Um,
Yeah.
and Paul would say those are the people who are fulfilling the law, that they just saw somebody who needed help. They didn't come in for free food, they just showed up to help. And so that's one of the distinctive features of Christianity is loving your neighbors, helping others. Um,
And I just want to add to that. Your neighbor does not necessarily mean somebody that you know or like or have anything in common with. You know, none of those things are necessary for that person to be your neighbor. In fact, your neighbor is all those things and more, you know. And we could have a long conversation about this. We could have a very, very long investigative kind of part of our podcast on this. But something I want us to be thinking about for the future is how do we get people to truly see that that is something that should be done, something that should happen, something that should be engaged in is in loving that way. And it starts, of course, in our own churches with loving each other.
yes, yeah, I agree. And it's part of the church. The church era that you and I came out of was largely talking about how to avoid hell. And the church of the 21st century is going to be about how do we love one another, how do we love God.
Right.
That it won't be out of sense of fear, it won't be out of sense of obligation at all to attend church. This will all be about how can we love better. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think we're going to spend more time about that. But we've got the second paragraph that I'm chomping at the bit to jump into. Is it ready? Are you ready to go in?
Go for it.
All right, here we go. Besides this, says Paul, or writes Paul, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. That's the end of the lesson.
Oh boy. Let's get
Oh
in on
boy.
this.
Yes. Where would you like to jump in?
Well, I think that the place I want to jump into is before we talk about putting on the armor of light, I kind of like to start with the negative or the challenging and kind of move towards the grace.
Sure.
And for me, I think it's important when we read this that Paul is writing to a church in Rome. And Rome is this society where these things are taking place. Debauchery and licentiousness, the Roman Empire and the emperors were known by their excesses.
Mhm.
They were known for all of the terrible things that they did to one another, all along those categories that Paul lists. And so this is also part of Paul saying, separate yourself from the culture in which you're in. And I think that sometimes as Christians, we might be hesitant to talk about some of these things because we don't want to come off as judgmental. But at the same time, these things are happening in our society right now.
Have you read the book? It's about Katniss. Why can't I think of the name? The Hunger Games.
Yes,
Have
yes.
you read those books? Right.
I have seen the movies.
Oh, did they make
See,
movies?
yeah, see, I ask you if you've seen the movie, you go no.
The
You
answer
ask
is
me if
usually
I've read
no.
the book, and then
Right.
I usually
Oh,
go,
I
yeah,
see.
I haven't always
So
I haven't always
the
read the
answer will
book.
apply for both. Okay. So when I was at St. John's School and teaching religion and all that, my students were reading these things, and so I needed to read it, and then got sucked into it. But the Rome that Paul is living in and talking about
Hmm.
is very much, from what I understand, was the model that they used for the city where the 12 districts would send people to.
Oh,
That they
okay.
had these massive parties where people would intentionally throw up so they can continue to eat.
The
They
vomitoriums,
had,
right?
yeah, they had all sorts of ways of changing their body image and looking a certain way. That even the Roman Colosseum, it's originally where the hunger. I mean, that's what they were doing. Starving people were going in there to fight and try to eat. You know that it's just um, that is this crazy mixed up society that Paul saw. and was writing about this. Um, and that living in the day is this whole idea of living as you would if everybody can see what you're doing, where, at night they would do all of the things of debauchery and licentiousness. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So you
Well,
said that we can still see some of that today.
I think we can see a lot of that today when we look at the choices that some people are making that are incredibly unhealthy, with the types of relationships that people are engaging in. You know, think about this, that it has become more and more popular to bare one's body, to bear everything about one's sexuality on the internet than ever before. And that there are people who say to themselves, I don't want a career, I don't want a 4 year degree. I just want to be online selling my image or selling videos of myself. That we've gone backwards somehow.
Yes. Um, so when Paul writes to not be in quarreling or in jealousy, but instead, love does no wrong to a neighbor. He's painting these two distinct, different things that are going on. And for those that are caught up the um, in the online world of having people follow you and stuff, there can be quarreling and there can be jealousy that is
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
entering into all of that. So, and none of that builds up either ourselves or our neighbor, and that Paul is instead telling us to do something different. So, what's he saying for us to do?
Well, I think he's talking about when he says putting on the armor of light. I think it's talking about living a life of virtue, but it's also talking about putting on Jesus. And, we may have this idea, and I want you kind of to expound on this because I know you know more of the Greek than I do. But when we think about this idea of putting on Jesus, it's not just, well, putting a Jesus shaped cloak on, it's something much deeper than that.
What would a Jesus shaped cloak look like?
Well, it would have sandals at the bottom that you put your feet in,
Okay, right.
right?
Yeah.
And then it had like a tunic, and then at the top, I'm going to be irreverent here and say it'd have some like a crown of thorns or something, like as the
Oh,
hoodie.
right. I thought it would just have like a really big beard.
That could be an
Yeah,
attachment.
right. I mean, that seems to be the popular. Well, anyway. Um, yeah. So he wrote, "Put on the Lord Jesus Christ," and many have wondered what in the world was Paul talking about by how do you put on Jesus? And um, there are many ways to look at it, and I think that Paul was talking about remember your baptism,
Hmm.
remember the water that washed over you, and put that on. Put on that notion. Now, in the Episcopal Church, we make a bunch of promises to respect the dignity of every human being, to follow in the practices and fellowship of the church. That there are many things that we say that we want to do with our baptism. And Paul, in my opinion, there are others that will disagree. Paul is talking about remember your baptism, and that in it there's no provision for the flesh, which, by the way, in Greek is sark. It's just great. Um, that so make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. That the baptism that we put on is to help others. The baptism that we wear is our, of course, our saving grace that comes to us and without anything we do to earn or deserve. We just get it from God, but we use it to help others, which links us back into the first paragraph about love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling the law. Remember your baptism. Remember to put Jesus on every day.
And I think that some of that is also remember the image of the one in whom you were created.
Ooh,
We were
wow.
created in the image of God,
Right,
so don't be something else besides the image of God.
right. And that the image isn't your outward flesh. The
It's
image is
your
the
soul.
stamp, right? The
Yeah,
stamp on
yeah.
the inside. Yeah. Um, because I think, I mean, you've probably heard stories about the Emperor Caligula.
Oh, yeah.
From what I've heard, it was much worse than what's been written. that that one
Yeah, that's
took
just what they wrote down.
right. that they're like, you wouldn't believe if we actually wrote what he was doing.
Hmm.
That is the provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. And the odd thing about satisfying one's fleshly desires is that they come back. Um, but loving one another, loving God with our whole heart, those are things that that doesn't come from desire. That when we do that, it lifts us up and
You know,
satisfies.
I think a way to look at this also is growing up, we sometimes have heroes. We sometimes have role models that we want to be, just like them. I had that Michael Jordan poster in my room,
Which one?
and well, I don't want to stick my tongue out, but it's the one where he's getting ready to dunk and he's got the tongue out, and
Yeah, I love that one.
yeah,
Right.
and
No,
and,
they
and
interviewed the guy that was doing this that was underneath him. Anyway, that
yeah,
yeah.
and so I look at that image and I say to myself, I want to be just like him, and maybe one day I could be like him, except I'm like have no basketball skill. I'm not 6'6", and a lot of other
Six
elements
nine.
within there. 6'6".
I thought he was 6'9".
Nope, six foot
When
six.
when did he have that gross? Anyway, sorry.
We'll look it up.
Folks.
Okay.
Wait.
Uh, but I say to myself, you know, I want to be like that person. And if I could put on that person's persona, if I could put on that person's skill, maybe I could be who I want to be. And I think what Paul is saying is don't look at the world for role models. Don't look at those things that are terrible, that are unhealthy, that kill the soul, and say that they're good. Put on the armor of light, put on Jesus Christ. And that's a hard lesson and a hard sermon for our young people today.
Why is that hard?
Well, because I remember being young and I remember not wanting to be told, you know, what to do or how to behave or how to live. Um, and I think we have this idea of kind of fear of missing out. We
Mhm.
want to do certain things because we feel they may be rites of passage, or just we want to push the envelope. But unfortunately, if we're not careful, we can make some very dangerous mistakes.
Yeah, right. Um, yeah, growing up, one of my favorite comedians, we had a record or two of his, and then we watched the TV show that had his name on it. Um, and then we found out he is not nearly the person that we thought he was.
No,
Everybody called him
no,
America's dad. And
right.
uh, yeah, um,
And that's the thing is if we put our faith in people, if we put our faith and say, I want to be like that person, we're always going to be disappointed.
right.
But if we say, I want to be like Christ, it will be hard. We will not always like doing it, but we will not be disappointed with the outcome.
Very true. So if Michael Jordan is 6'6", that makes him just 2 inches taller than me. And I don't know. I I
I
swear he's
think, I'm just going to go on a limb here and say that just the 2 inches is just kind of the beginning of the distance between the two
it's
of
no
you.
right. Yes.
I
He
mean,
was
if we're
cut from
focusing,
his high school basketball team.
like I said, this can go in a lot of different directions with this, but I'm just not going to measure myself or anyone else on that along those lines. But just
Well,
to kind of mhm.
wait. Alex, you're right. He is 6'6". LeBron James is 6'9".
Well,
Kobe Bryant also 6'6". So,
there you go.
and I met the Twin Towers in Texas, um, and man, there were seven. Hakeem was 7'2", I think. Anyway,
Hmm.
but he looked like he's more than a foot taller than me. I mean, it was just amazing. So, anyway, so folks, if this is a lesson for you all, Alex is right. So listen
Well,
to that man.
it was bound to happen sooner or later. Uh,
Right.
so kind of back to the last part of our segment. How do we, in love, say to the person, "You're wearing the wrong clothes"?
Do we say it? Or by loving our neighbor? do we say things by our actions?
But I think though, if I was wearing the wrong thing, this is just me. I think if I was wearing the wrong thing, part of me would want to know. Part of me would want to be told, like, that's don't wear that. That's the wrong, that's the unhealthy thing to wear. And this is where I come back. We were talking about this before we started the podcast this afternoon, is that, we sometimes worry about judging others or coming off as judgy. But I think there are times when we have to speak the truth and tell someone that may not be the healthiest choice. And it's their way to listen or not. And we do have to say it with a sense of humility that we ourselves have often been caught wearing the wrong thing also.
Um, yeah, and so um, you've asked a really good question, and one that we did not discuss before you hit record. So um, I'm intrigued by this. The I mean, I've learned in what we do for a living that it is always better to be in a collar than to not. Like if you think maybe I shouldn't or I don't have to, it's always a good idea to have it.
Hmm.
And we moved my son Ethan into the dormitory, which is 5, 6 blocks south, yeah, of the cathedral. And our new bishop had us doing something that day. I forgot what it was in the cathedral. And so I had my T-shirt and stuff that I was wearing to help Ethan move, and I was carrying because we had to have cassock and everything else. It was something really formal. And I don't know what that was. Anyway,
It was the installation of the bishop.
was it actually his installation? I bet it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a really busy time for me, but like today. But so I'm carrying my cassock and everything else. I'm in a t-shirt and I walk in and there's Doug. There's Bishop Scherf, who is about to be installed as our bishop. And what do you do? So I just walked right over, I shook his hand, and I said, "Congratulations, Bishop. Oh, were we supposed to wear collars to this?" And he just started to laugh. He's like, "You look great." And I said, "Thanks." And I'm sure he saw I had a garment bag in my arm. But it's just one of those um, so
Yeah,
he didn't
it's
say I was wearing the wrong thing. He just said I look great.
I think the what we should be cognizant of is that um, wearing the right thing is not about impressing people or going by societal norms. Wearing the right thing means wearing the image of God and bearing it to others.
Mm. Would that be like loving your neighbor?
It would definitely be like loving your neighbor because that's what Jesus did.
Exactly. Good.
There you go.
There you go. I like that. Um,
Yeah.
well, I have enjoyed exploring rooms with you, and I have to say, not only were you right about the height of a basketball star from the '90s who played in Chicago and beat my Seattle Sonics all the time, um, you're also right that we should be excited about this Romans reading. And I
Yeah,
am
I
much more
think we should.
excited about Alex. And you've helped me build a bridge between myself and it.
Well, thank you. And you helped me build a bridge with it just by being able to get some of these thoughts out and talk about them.
And The Hunger Games is a good book series if you ever wanted to read.
I will get right on that.
Well, there's there's plenty. It's a good summer read, although we're now in fall. So yeah,
uh, on my next vacation.
there you go. Right.
There you go.
You won't be able to
Well,
put them down. It's quite.
well, I appreciate your time and I appreciate everyone else's time in joining us. And I look forward to seeing everyone again.
And I look forward to seeing that. And Alex, God bless you and your family. And to all of our listeners, may God bless and watch over you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.